see it there. One of them is putting in an extra effort, which takes us to organizational citizenship. This is interesting. I actually just published a paper on this. It's on how abusive supervisors, it's kind of a weird stuff. I'll give it to you real quick. How abusive supervisors basically bully managers. When they do that, people are less likely to engage in organizational citizenship. So this is not your job. This is going above and beyond your job. So some people use the words the extra role behaviors. Meaning, it's my job to be a professor. Yes, that's true. It's my job to advise students. Yes, that's true. But when a student calls me at midnight because they got a DUI and they need someone to bail them out of jail and they're afraid to call their parents, that's not really my job, right? I might go ahead and do that. I don't know if I can do that. But anyway, I might go ahead and do that because I really, really care about the institution as central and I care about that student as an individual. So it's like when you go above and beyond what your job calls for in a positive way. That's what we call organizational citizenship. So in our study, we found if you have a bully manager, there's a culture of fear. Like people are afraid to do anything, so nobody's going above and beyond. Nobody's doing the extra stuff. Nobody's getting there early or staying there late, etc. The weird part about the study is we actually also found that it's worse. That effect is stronger when coworkers talk about it. So like if I have a bully manager and you and I are on the same team and we get together and we talk about, you know, what a jerk that person is or something like that, it actually makes it worse. Makes me even do less of this. But organizational citizenship is great. Good supervision, and really the principle is psychological safety. Do people feel safe to be themselves at work? If so, you're going to have way more above and beyond the Call of Duty kind of behavior. All right. Real quick, let's plow through absenteeism and turnover. Each of the things that we talked about earlier, satisfaction, commitment, motivation theories, a lot of them predict whether or not somebody shows up to work. So it's absenteeism, an unscheduled absence, or whether or not they quit. So we'll hit them briefly. Employee absenteeism, when someone doesn't show up to work when they're supposed to. There's different types. There's involuntary absences and voluntary absences. Involuntary is I didn't want to, I couldn't help it. Involuntary is I could help it and I didn't want to. Pretty straightforward. I put gender effects here just because this comes up. I always ask in class, I say, who do you think is absent more, men or women? And universally people say men. And I say, why? You know, 90% plus say men. I say, why? And they say, well, because it seems like they would. And then I start pushing. And it's this idea that men are more deviant than women, right? That's the argument. Men comprise much more prisoners and felony rates, felons, and stuff like that. So they think, well, men. So absenteeism in that case is produced by deviance. Someone just is irresponsible or they don't show up for work. That's kind of the conclusion. And actually, women are absent at a rate of 2 to 3 times much more than men. Specifically, women who are mothers who have young children. And so what we see is, hey, there's an outbreak of chicken pox at the preschool, and so my kid can't go to preschool today. Well, I can't bring my kid to work, so I'm going to call in sick. So I wanted to put that up there just to point out you as an organization, you can actually develop policies that significantly reduces absenteeism, specifically in working mothers. It's a diversity issue, it's an equity issue, but you can have variable start times. If you can have variable start time situations like that, you can develop telework or virtual work policies where if that happens, work from home, reasonable, whatever. I have a friend who runs a company here, and I think she's got maybe 20 people on her team, and she says you work from home twice a month. And better save it if somebody gets sick, you have young kids, etc. Anyway, those are the options. If you want to go all out, you can build a preschool, but you're probably not in the business of building preschools. Not many people are. So, how do we deal with absenteeism? Number one, there is a disciplinary approach, and that is you were absent, don't do it again, happens again. I told you not to do it again. Now you're being, whatever, suspended from work without pay for a week. So since they didn't show up, you're going to make them so they can't show up. It's kind of a funny thing. And if it continues all the way up to, no, like you're not a reliable employee, we can't trust you, you're fired. That's a disciplinary approach, very common. The positive reinforcement approach is got a little mixed results. So that is, if somebody doesn't miss work, you give them like a reward or a bonus. When we get to compensation, we'll talk about do you pay people for unused sick time, stuff like that. But in this case specifically, what you're encouraging, if you have like awards for attendance, what you're encouraging at that point, incentivizing, is not doing good at your job, but showing up and having a heartbeat on your job. Like, that's it. So you want to be careful what you reward, because what you reward you're going to get. It's fine to do that. It probably shouldn't be significant reward, because what you could really be doing is rewarding the worst performer on your team for showing up every day and maybe not making things much better. So anyway, two different approaches. You can deal with that. Most people use kind of a combination approach. Little reward if you're really good with your attendance, and progressive discipline if you're not. There's a few other ways that I really like. I really like PTO programs, especially if I'm working with smaller firms. I think PTO is helpful. It's flexible. Think of it like this. Okay, you have 40 hours of PTO, paid time off this year. I don't care how you spend it. You can spend it on vacation. You can use it when you're sick. You can say, you know what, I just don't feel like going to work. You can do whatever you want, but you have 40 hours, 80 hours, whatever it is, of PTO. Way easier to manage, especially in smaller firms without complex, payroll systems. So much easier to manage because you're not documenting or categorizing the reason why people are gone. It's just that they're gone, and that's all that matters. Washington State has got some newer laws on paid family leave, sick, vacation, time off, stuff like that. So assuming you give at least the minimum PTO, which is not very much, you're actually in compliance with each of those laws too, which helps you with the regulatory process. So that's employee absenteeism. Employee turnover. That's when people quit. Here's a heuristic I think is important. People don't leave jobs. People leave people. Usually if somebody quit a job, it was their manager, it was coworkers, somebody at the company. They don't usually say, well, the job was demotivating, so I left. I mean, sometimes that happens. But usually you say, what was demotivating about it? You can say, well, I worked with idiots. There it is. People don't leave jobs. Usually people leave people. Some signs you can look for. When we get worried about, let me just go to the next slide here. When we get worried about turnover, I'm going to jump down, is when it's this, dysfunctional turnover. All firms have turnover. There's arguments like, okay, what's a good turnover rate? 5%, 6%? Totally depends. Depends on your history, depends on the industry. If you're in fast food, if you're at 5 or 6%, that's really weird. If you're at 80%, that's probably pretty normal. Fast food is accustomed to that. I can go to work at McDonald's right now, and within about an hour or two maybe of training and orientation, I can be sort of productive on the job. If I go to NASA right now to design the next astronaut mission, it might take 5 or 6 years for me to really make an awesome contribution. So if people can spool up quickly, turnover is less of an issue. But in most companies, this right here is what you're worried about. Super key individuals, high performers, leaving at really critical times. You just get a big new order for a product, and your number one engineer just got a better offer, and they're quitting. You should have known about that. You should have been in that person's head long before that happens. So here are some things we look at in terms of sign of possible turnover. But really, this is on your first line manager to have a positive, constructive relationship with everybody on your team, especially those key players that have the ability to deliver on core competencies that will help your firm survive. We need to know what's happening. Okay, different types of turnover. Involuntary turnover. We don't mind that. Involuntary turnover is fine because we, the company, we got to decide who left. We fired you, we laid you off, you did something unethical or unsafe, whatever it was, and we got to decide. That's okay. Voluntary turnover. We don't like that. As a company, as a manager, we want to be the ones who decide who actually leaves. We're probably not going to lay off or fire key individuals, high performers at really critical times. So involuntary, we get it, it's normal. Voluntary is kind of freaky. Functional turnover rarely happens. Rarely happens voluntarily anyway. Sometimes we might fire or lay off the worst performing employee, but it's not typical for your worst performing employee to voluntarily leave. Why is that? Those who do leave jobs are those who can leave jobs, specifically your best performers. So voluntary turnover, if somebody's leaving, they probably have a better offer, right? If somebody's really bad at their job, they probably don't have a lot of offers on the table. So functional turnover is when poor performers leave. Dysfunctional turnover, dysfunctional obviously for the company, is when really good performers leave. There's two other types of turnover that you have to know because you can't manage it all perfectly. There's controllable turnover, stuff that we could have influenced. Like we're paying someone $150,000 a year to be an accountant and they leave for a job at $160,000 a year. That was dumb. If they're good, we should have kept them. We should have given them a 15 grand bump. We should have known about it. The manager should have known in performance and compensation reviews how the person felt about their salary. We could have dealt with that. Uncontrollable turnover. I had a female executive at Boeing. She was outstanding, maybe 42, 43 years old. And she came in. She said, James, I'm resigning. And I was just like, no, you got to be kidding me. We've been working on all these Society for Women Engineers, all these programs, right, to give these young female engineers confidence that they can have a good career. They see you, you're an executive, you're still like, what do you need? Like, is it money? You got it. Is it time off? You got it. James, I have breast cancer. Okay, I get it. I'm sorry. I'll start the paperwork. Let me know if there's anything I can do. That's uncontrollable turnover. Sometimes you just can't do anything about it in a positive or, in this case, a negative way. So, a few myths about retention. And then one last comment. Money is the main reason that people leave. No. Money is usually, it's not the main reason that people say they leave. It's usually people say it's a factor. Very, very rarely does somebody leave for a job making less money. Sometimes, if it's a really cool worker in a location, or families moving, right, spouses, stuff like that. Usually people say money was an issue, but they won't say it's the main issue. They usually say it's people. Hiring has little to do with retention. No, of course not. You can hire on traits such as conscientiousness. You can hire on past attitudes like recent commitment to your last company. That's why in an interview you might ask the question, why did you leave your last job? If someone says, because I didn't like my boss, that matters. If someone says, because my husband or wife got a transfer and a promotion to a different area, this area, you're like, great, that's good. They're not just gonna leave on a whim. If you train people, you train them for another employer. No, actually, several studies show that if you invest in people, they're more likely to stay. So some people say, well, we don't train people because they leave to another job. To which I would respond, they leave to another job because you don't invest in them. It's kind of circular reasoning there a little bit. Don't be concerned about retention, keeping people during organizational change. When there's a change in mission, change in CEO, change in strategy, there tends to be more turnover. No, you should be concerned about retention because especially your key players, they're the ones that are actually going to be able to execute organizational change and make it happen. They know the culture, the context, the products, the relationships. And if they leave, it's just going to make your change much more difficult or maybe a failure. Last, if high performers want to leave the company cannot hold them. Well, legally this is true, but it's listed is a myth in that why do high performers want to leave the company? Are you not challenging them? Are you not paying them? Are you not caring about them? People are going to leave. It's turnover. It happens, right? But especially on those kind of the key players that are in the core competency part of your business, you need to know how they feel about their job. It shouldn't be a shock. It shouldn't be a surprise. If it is, that means your first line manager probably didn't do their job very well building a trusting relationship. Okay. Last thing I want to say on this, how do we know if we're doing good or bad in turnover or what's causing turnover? There's a thing called exit interviews. I always recommend this for companies. First year turnover. If somebody comes to your company 1 year, you've gone through all the investment to find them, to interview them, to place them, to pay them, to train them. In 1 year, if they quit, you really want to know why, because that's the future of your company that you believed in walking out the door. And there could be a few reasons for that. Number one, you need to fix your selection process. You're not finding the right people. Number two, when they got there, it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. You need to refine the psychological contract. Or number three, they were poorly managed. When they got there, they had a horrible experience. You need to invest in management development, right? And managerial systems that care for employees when they're first coming in. So anyway, a lot of things that you can see that you can address But this is one of my favorite metrics to deal with really the longevity of firm survival. So, motivation, job attitudes, absenteeism, and turnover. And for this short stint, that'll do it for Chapter 5. Have a great day.